I'm from RSAWeb, and we're actually a cloud and internet service provider. That we're based in Cape Town, offices in Cape Town and Joburg. And yeah, we do some very interesting things on the local side. We've got a CDN service as well. You've probably seen the pamphlets in your packs. Can you hear me at the back? Just want to check. No, is that better? So cool. Let me start again. No, it's cool. Okay, so yeah, we're a cloud and internet services provider in Cape Town and Joburg, and yeah, we have an interesting CDN service. We've got local nodes, and we had a mention of Max CDN and Amazon CloudFront earlier. They're great, but they've got no local presence. So really, you know, when you're using those CDN services, what lands up happening is that that content is still actually coming out of somewhere in London or Europe and hitting us in South Africa. And that's really a major drawback, because obviously that adds anywhere from 160 to 200 milliseconds on every object that gets served to a user. Okay, so really I'm going to set a little bit of a scene here, and you know, this is just a template from our friends Obox, and basically, you know, you come along and you're like, cool, I want to start a new blog or a new news site, or I want to put up my new company website, or for myself or a customer or whatnot, and it's great, and you know, everything's going along swimmingly, and you know, launch, and well, you know, then what? Cool. So this is what typically happens with some customers, and I've seen this from a lot of customers that have really come to us, and you know, eventually they either are killing a shared hosting server because they're getting some traffic, or yeah, they're on a server but they have done no optimization, they've done nothing really, and what lands up happening is that their CPU just goes to 100%, and that's really, some of you will know this, but it's really, we used to call it a long time ago, it was called the Slashdot effect. I don't know if that's really applicable nowadays, because I don't know if anybody actually uses Slashdot anymore. Does anybody? Probably not. But yeah, effectively what it meant was that as soon as your website bumbled along over here, you know, getting a couple hundred page views every day or whatever, and then all of a sudden you got stuck on Slashdot website, and you literally went overnight from getting no traffic to, you know, hundreds of times more traffic than you ever have received in your entire life. And yeah, that really, what it lands up happening is this kind of experience, and 404s. So you're effectively giving zero content to those users that are really would love to actually have seen your content, but they can't anymore because your server's fallen over. So really, we try and work on a bit of a strategy for customers, and we try and make sure that we look at multiple different aspects and really look at, you know, help customers understand why you need to do these certain things. First of all, well, clearly your site's not working, so you've got to do something about it. But we try and take a bit of a holistic approach, at least. So really, our thing is, it's more around offloading and flattening your site, and also caching, and I'll talk a little bit more about that now. So really, things like images, CSS, JavaScript, and really anything that's static, so something that's not going to change. So you upload a new image, you're not gonna go and change that very quickly. You might upload an ad, but it's only going to be every 2 weeks or something like that, you know, or a week. You might upload a couple of different variations, call them different files or different file names, but otherwise, yeah, it's pretty static. And when I mean dynamic, I mean something that's going to change regularly and quickly, every few seconds. So really, to offload your things is super important. Really what it does is we use CDN to do a lot of this for customers. We are reducing the server load by reducing the number of connections. So if you go to the average WordPress site, you'll see that if you look in the HTML, you'll have one page of HTML, you might have 2 or 3 style sheets, a bit of JavaScript, and then you might have 40 pictures, a whole bunch of pictures. And really what we're saying is that, well, there may be 3 or 4 objects that you're trying to actually look at from that server. The other 40 can all go to CDN. Why are you serving them from your server? It doesn't make sense. So really with CDN, it really makes your website a lot faster, and it just reduces and gives you a lot more overhead in terms of of resources, and you can just do a lot more with that same hardware that you had before. So that shared hosting provider that you were hosting that little site on isn't actually phoning you as soon as you would have thought now, because you've offloaded to CDN. So yeah, I think the major one is also that your objects then are local. So let's say the site is hosted in South Africa, but you've got a user that comes to you from the UK or the US. With a CDN service, what you're going to end up doing is actually serving those objects from the closest edge location. So that will be like if the guy's in the UK, it'll come out of a UK node. If he's in the US, out of a US node. And then likewise in South Africa. You're in South Africa, it'll come out of a South African node. And really what you're doing then is bringing that ping time right down to milliseconds, so sub 10 milliseconds. And when they pick up those 40 different images, that's going to happen really quickly. So you've got a site load time, it's going to bring that right down for you, and your customer's going to get a better experience. We did a project now with Kalahari, just to use a great example, where the guys are really, all they wanted to do was improve their site load times. Because what they were finding is that their servers were falling over, serving all the static content, but actually we were saying, well, just give us all the static content and just concentrate on doing the meat, like the actual information, the price, and the different things on the site. So yeah, that was allowing them to actually reduce the actual page load and improve the customer experience. Well, they're an e-commerce store, that's what they do. So the next thing is caching. I don't think you can all see it, but over here we've pretty much got hard drives. In terms of latency, they're in the order of sort of 10 milliseconds. And then you've got your actual RAM inside of server. And really, RAM inside a server is super quick. If you know, the first thing people say to you is just upgrade your RAM on your PC or your Mac because it's going to speed up things. It's the same thing, okay? So really, it's just a hell of a lot faster. So you want to try and use memory for everything, really. So yeah, what we want to do is try and put as much stuff in there, and obviously the previous talk is talking very much about the same sort of thing. Get as much stuff into memory as possible. It's not that easy when you're on a shared hosting platform, but if you've got a server or a cloud server or something like that, you can start controlling these things yourself. Okay, and one of the major ones is a tool called Memcache, and basically what that really does is obviously the first three letters, mem and cache, so in-memory caching, and basically what that's really doing for you is offloading stuff off that slow disk that we saw earlier and sticking it on high-speed memory. So, sorry. A little bit trigger happy there. So yeah, with something like W3 Total Cache or Bat Cache, what you're really looking at doing is the first thing you want to do is cache to disk, which is pretty good. You're probably not doing that if you're starting the site from scratch. The next thing you really want to do is actually look at something like Memcache, and then as you get really big and you're a News24 or one of these guys, you want to start looking at clusters of these sorts of things, but all memory. Then the other thing is you really want to try and flatten your site. So one thing that really kills websites is plugins. So sometimes we do a bit of a review for customers on their WordPress site because it's falling over. And what we end up finding is that they've got some random plugin that they've installed, and it's just, you look at the usage and it's killing the site. I mean, whatever was happening before, their page load was half a second or a second, it's now 5 or 6 seconds. And plugins are one of the huge problems. And then one of the other things to flatten also is minifying the JavaScript and the CSS. We have had this mentioned already, so I'm not going to bore you too much. The other one is your high volume pages also, something like your home page. Now, if you get a /dot effect happening, you want to try and make sure that you're not hitting that database at all for any of those calls. So it's super important to make sure that we're flattening the site and we're not hitting the database layer at all. I'm not going to dwell too much on that because we've spoken about it already. And the other option is also to compress things. It depends if you have CPU available on the server or if you have a load balancer or something like that. You want to actually be able to compress the actual HTML that's going to the end user. So that's really from the web server or the load balancer all the way to the end user. And what that's really doing is taking that HTML that might have been 20 or 50K and dropping it right down. It literally compresses 80% or 90% with HTML. So it reduces the load time on that first load for the customer and, again, improves the customer experience. So really, why should we avoid this kind of problem, and what should we do about it? And really the question is, so we start out with a good example here. You might be on a shared hosting server, and if you're on a shared hosting server, you're also at the mercy of everyone else that's on there. So if their site's running WordPress or any other technology platform and they get /dotted, your system is going to go offline too. But so let's just say you've done a little bit of planning and you're expecting a bit of traffic. You've bought a server. Cool. Now you put your web server and your database on there, and you go along and all of that's great. What happens when you're getting more traffic, though? Now you want to start doing a few more clever things, like having a separate SQL server over here, offloading the transactions and actually splitting the stuff out. So really, this is more around like sort of about hundreds of page views a day. I'm going to try and give you a rough guide. I'm giving you a guide at the bottom here. It is very rough. It all depends on how many plugins you've got, what your user base is doing in terms of like how many comments are they making, how many users have you got on the system. So these sort of guides here are very rough. Please don't take them as gospel. So you see I've also put CDN in there, and then there's also a little block for memcache. I don't know if the guys at the back can see this, but with memcache, yeah, you're basically offloading, or you're actually reducing the number of calls to the SQL server on the back end. So then the next sort of step is to expand this a bit. And now you're suddenly getting a little bit more successful. You are getting a few hundreds of thousands of page views, or a few tens of thousands of page views a day. And you want to grow the solution a little bit further. So you add another web server, and what you'll end up having to do now is actually put a load balancer in front. Okay. Now, a load balancer is just an intelligent device that knows how to split traffic up, and it will look at the web servers and see how busy they are. And I've kept one database server there because you can now, if we're offloading CDN, or maybe offloading our ads. One thing I haven't put on here is comments. So that's the other thing that really kills systems is comments. Because every time someone loads a comment, it has to create a database or write to the database. That page that was previously cached now has to get reloaded. Now, if you suddenly get, that page gets tweeted about on Twitter, and it goes to someone with 10,000 followers, and all of a sudden a whole bunch of people arrive at your website. Or even, if you get tweeted by someone like Lance Armstrong, your server's going to fall over. It's quite simple. So, the guy's, I think he's got 3 million or 5 million followers or something on Twitter. That will hurt you very quickly. So, in a situation like this, you want to really make sure that you're caching everything. Even this kind of setup, if it's done right, you might be able to handle that traffic. It all depends, is the answer, really. So then the next step is sort of level 3, that we call it. We've added another load balancer with some more cache, or some more web. We separated the cache out onto its own server. And we've added a SQL database slave over here. And really what that's doing is separating the transactions out now and allowing you to tolerate a lot more load on the system as well. So all those page views that you're going to get, the few hundreds of thousands of page views, will now actually be able to be handled by this server as well. So you're actually just increasing the load and just, well, the actual capacity of the system. And then the next sort of step is to scale that out sideways and add as many web servers and as many SQL servers as you need to actually perform this operation. I mean, this is a typical sort of implementation where you're getting a hell of a lot of traffic. I mean, this will handle this kind of setup. You're talking probably more than the average South African website. I mean, that's the sort of scale we're talking about here. So just a couple of quirks that I've got from some of our engineers, and just a couple of things that we've discovered along the way that you kind of don't find until they actually bite you in the arse. there was a customer that had this issue with SQL calc, which is a SQL query, and it would just literally lead to the site falling over. So yeah, you must make sure that you upgrade it, because I know it's tough to keep stuff upgraded and make sure the plugins all working, your theme's compatible and all that sort of stuff, but seriously, it's a good idea. And one of the major ones is comments can really hurt. And I've kind of touched on this a little bit now, but it really makes a huge difference, because every time someone comments, your system has to then go, okay, cool, this page has been updated, and go and fetch a new one. So if that's happening quite a lot to your site, it can really hurt you quite badly. And you know, in that sort of case, I would recommend something, and we had it earlier, but I would use Discuss and offload that those comments to someone else, and it's fairly cost effective to do that. And really what it's doing, and what I'm saying, is that it's going to reduce the amount of hardware and actual infrastructure that you need dramatically, and it'll simplify your solution and just really cost you less to do. And then, yeah, from a user's perspective, we had another customer the other day. They had 750,000 registered users on their site. Now, every single one of those is at least one entry in a database. The problem with that is that every time that person comes back, is that the server actually wants to go and look. Back. New batteries. Okay, we are new batteries now. And so basically what was happening is that site was just slowing to a crawl when they got any kind of load, and you were thinking, cheapers, these guys got tons of infrastructure sitting behind it, but there was inherently a problem in the way they were doing things. So, yeah, my couple of, just to wrap up, I've got a couple of key points that I think are quite relevant. I would outsource the comments to Discuss. I would, for this master-slave setup, we've spoken about it earlier, HyperDB is the way to go, really. There's not really too many other options besides the W3 Enterprise. Then I would also recommend using CDN. Now, the awesome thing with the W3 Total Cache plugin is that CDN is so easy to do with it. You literally install the plugin and turn the CDN on. It's like, it's super simple. So if you're not doing it, you should be. Then I would minimize the use of any dynamic plugins. Sorry guys, I dropped the mic there. I would definitely minimize the use of dynamic plugins. This is a major one. If you want to find out where you're having a problem, you need to look at the MySQL slow log. It's normally set up on the server, but sometimes you have to turn it on, and it might not be on by default. I would compress the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. One of the things that I won't touch too much on was there's a distributed file system that you would need to set up if you are running multiple servers, but don't worry too much about that now. And then the major one is really tuning MySQL. So everyone goes along and installs their LAMP stack, Apache, MySQL, on their new server, and they install WordPress. And they're lekker, awesome, everything's working. But the problem is that they've forgotten to actually tune MySQL. And it's something that you really have to do, and you actually need someone that knows what they're doing to do that. It's super important, because that's where all your caching sits on that sort of first layer, that sort of step one of you deploying your first server with WordPress. The problem is with shared hosting is you can't really do that very easily yourself. So unless your host is really nice, but I doubt they would want to do, because it's going to affect other customers. And then one of the other key areas is you can also optimize your WordPress config. So you can prevent the number of calls actually happening through PHP and getting settings and all these other bits and pieces, and bring a lot of that content. It is quite a technical thing to do if you don't know what you're doing, but I would definitely recommend doing that. And then from an APC or Xcache perspective, that's also a huge performance increase that I would recommend you implement. It does come with a few hassles, but that's something that you can sort of implement later on once you've got the first couple of things up and running. And that's pretty much it from me. Okay. Questions? Yeah, Ashley, your mic's off. I know I touched on a lot of the same sort of content, but hopefully it was a little bit more on the business side, so there's not too much overlap. Cool. Yeah, sure.
About CDNs, I'm not sure if you understand how they actually work. I'm not really sure how they work.
Okay.
In terms of people actually using WordPress, like they, for instance, say, okay, all their text data, they go put into WordPress, but the images, for instance, which are, the bigger files, they take up more memory, okay, on your database. So you would obviously want to have those on a CDN somewhere. Is that correct understanding how that would work? And how would you then, in WordPress, if you put your image on the CDN, well, how are you going to get the image on the CDN and on WordPress?
Cool. Okay. So I hope everyone knows what CDN is. I actually didn't explain that earlier. So CDN is a content delivery network. Okay. Really, what it's doing is it's taking those static objects away from you and actually putting them else on other servers. Okay. So how you get your content onto a CDN is really, there's two types. So one is a push CDN and the other one is a pull CDN. So we operate a pull CDN, which is, it's very simple to implement. So when someone uploads an image onto your site, when you put an image into a post, let's use that as a good example. That image will then sit on your server, okay? And then what you're doing is in W3 Total Cache will actually, you'll tell it, use the RSAWeb CDN over here. This is my link, okay? And what it will do is it will actually rewrite the HTML, and instead of just saying source, or image source is whack, let's just call it, it's WP content uploads, wada, and then it's image name.jpg, okay? It will actually it'll take that first part after the source where it's whack images or whack upload or whatever it is, wherever you put it, and it will put in like a HTTP media.sitename.ca.za. So what you're doing is you're actually just redirecting that to another place. And then what happens is that with our CDN is that you tell it, you set that up in W3 Total Cache. So let's just say we've got www.rsaweb.co with an image. The actual CDN, our CDN, if you're saying, okay, cool, you're going to set up media.rsaweb. Now, in your code, you've referenced media.rsaweb. It will then fetch it from your primary site. So there's actually no change fundamentally that you need to make on your side. It's very simple to implement. It's a simple process. And that's the big advantage for pull CDN. The push CDN is where you actually will upload content to another system completely. It's not even on your system at all. And then the CDN will serve it out of there. It's a bit more complicated to get set up, but that's pretty much the big difference between them.
We've got time for one more question. So Tyrone, here we go.
When you speak about having to move from shared hosting, is it dependent on WordPress or just generally high volumes of traffic? I mean, like if you've got a blog, I'm sure you could sustain shared hosting for quite a while. Or at what stage? Because there's quite a big price difference.
Well, look,
move into your own private.
Yeah, you see also, I mean, if you got a shared hosting, you don't have to manage the server. First point. But the thing is that with a shared hosting versus your own system is that you actually don't have as much control anymore. So you can't do creative things with caching and setting the memory limits and all that sort of thing. So you're kind of restricted to what you can actually do. The thing with, with a shared hosting, it honestly depends on the host. Like, it depends on who the host is. Like, we have a lot of shared hostings, but sometimes we'll say, these are the top 5% in terms of CPU and database calls on a specific server. And we'll actually look at it and say, well, is it within a bit of a spec, or is it outside? Is the guy getting way more traffic than we're anticipating and affecting other users on that system? When that happens, then we say, listen, you need to be on your own system, because otherwise it's just not working. So it does depend on the host, though. Like, different hosts have different levels of tolerance.
Okay. Thank you very much. We've got Byron Roeder on next, and thank you very much, Mark. That was an awesome discussion.
Thanks, guys.